Zen Buddhism by the numbers, number 6, the Paramitas, Prajna, wisdom. Excerpts from the Platform Sutra of Huineng. Good friends, this Dharma teaching of mine is based on meditation and wisdom. But don't make the mistake of thinking that meditation and wisdom are separate. Meditation and wisdom are of one essence, not two. Meditation is the body of wisdom, and wisdom is the function of meditation. Wherever you find wisdom, you find meditation. And wherever you find meditation, you find wisdom. Good friends, what this means is that meditation and wisdom are the same. What does prajna mean? Prajna means wisdom. At all times, to keep your thought free of ignorance, and always to practice wisdom. This is what we mean by the practice of prajna. One thought of ignorance, and prajna stops. One thought of wisdom, and prajna reappears. A person whose mind is full of ignorance may say, I'm practicing prajna. But prajna has no form. It's the nature of wisdom. And what does paramita mean? This is Sanskrit. In our language, we say, what leads to the other shore, which means what transcends birth and death. When we are attached to objects, we give rise to birth and death, like when waves form on water. This is what we mean by this shore. When we are free of objects, there is no birth or death, like when a river flows on forever. So we say this leads to the other shore. This is what we mean by paramita. Good friends, Maha Prajna Paramita is the noblest, the highest, the ultimate. It isn't present, it isn't past, and it isn't future. And yet the Buddhas of the present, the past, and the future all come from it and use this great wisdom to reach the other shore and to break through the afflictions and passions of the 5 skandhas. As the noblest, the highest, and the ultimate, so should you praise this teaching of the supreme vehicle. Those who practice it are certain to become Buddhas, but it is neither present nor past nor future. It's the same as meditation and wisdom, and it isn't affected by any dharma. The Buddhas of the past, the present, and the future come from it, and thereby transform the 3 poisons into morality, meditation, and wisdom. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Almost finished with the weekend session. Flies by, doesn't it? It's feels like we're just getting started. Like we could buckle down and do this for a while. Although I'm sure some of you would rather not. So, Soen Shaku Memorial Session, Soen Shaku, who we're honoring today. A lot of you already know who he was and what his history was, and I'm not going to go into very much depth on him, but it's fitting to at least mention a few highlights of his life. He was born in the latter half of the 19th century and became a monk at a relatively young age and completed his Dharma study and transmission at a young age. He was still in his 20s when he completed his training. And very unusual for a Zen monk, and particularly a Zen monk of that time, but very much in the spirit of Dogen, talking about how even people who have attained clarity and a degree of wisdom should keep pushing themselves and keep training. He wasn't content to stay in the confines of what he knew and where he was comfortable. Instead, he went to Ceylon, today known as Myanmar, and practiced as a bhikkhu in the Theravadan tradition. Spent 3 years as a forest monk in Myanmar or Ceylon. Very unusual for anyone really from Japan to travel all the way to Myanmar, but particularly someone who had already attained a certain degree of recognition, having already received Dharma transmission. When he came back to Japan, he ran 2 monasteries, and in 1893, he was asked to represent Zen Buddhism at the World Congress of Religions in Chicago. It was the same year as the Chicago World's Fair. It was kind of one of the activities related to the World's Fair. The World Congress of Religion, where he was the first Zen monk that we know of to set foot in the United States. He was accompanied by several other Japanese Buddhists and Buddhists of other traditions, as well as Hindus and various other religions that had not previously been known in the United States. So it was a very important moment in American history, a meeting of religions from around the world and a chance for people to have their eyes open to a different way of connecting to the spiritual world, the world of wisdom and compassion. He had 2 students who accompanied him at that time. One was a lay student, D.T. Suzuki, who many of you may have heard of, who became the intellectual face of Zen in the West for many years, for decades. He accompanied him as his translator because he was already relatively fluent in English. He was, at that time, an unknown philosophy student at the University of Tokyo. And also a monk named Nyogen Senzaki, who would eventually accompany him to America one more time in the early 1900s, I believe it was 1905, accompany him to San Francisco. And once he arrived, D.T. Suzuki, Soen Shaku basically said, "You're on your own, buddy. Plant the seed of Dharma here." And that's exactly what he did. He stayed, not knowing any English, or barely knowing any English. And he worked various menial jobs for many years, learning English, learning American customs, establishing himself in the spirit of America, and then started teaching Zen to a select group of students. He continued teaching Zen for many years. He was still in the United States when the Second World War started, and was interned in one of the internment camps, I believe in Wyoming, and lived the remainder of his life in the United States, except for one brief visit back to Japan. He established a relationship by mail with Soen Roshi, who was the teacher of Edo Roshi, who founded the temple here, as well as the monastery in upstate New York. Soen Roshi was a poet, and Nyogen Senzaki saw one of his poems and started writing to him, and they kept up a correspondence for a long time. Eventually, Soen Roshi sent his student, Edo Roshi, to establish Zen in America. So a lot of connections, but it all started with Soen Shaku. So even though his name is not really well known in the West, he had an important role to play in bringing Zen to America, even if he himself didn't really live here for more than a few weeks. Still, his influence was great through his two students. D.T. Suzuki, the intellectual face of Zen, also established the Zen Study Society, although for a long time it was more or less just a shell that Edo Roshi eventually inherited and developed into the organization that it is today, or set the groundwork for the organization as it exists today. So we honor Soen Shaku. My favorite part of the Soen Shaku story is his journey to Ceylon to become a forest monk. I just find that inspiring and incredible, and very much along the lines of what I was reading to you yesterday from Dogen, when he talks about, suppose you're confident in your understanding and rich in enlightenment, enjoying clarity of vision, attaining the way, clarifying the mind, and arousing an aspiration that scales the heavens. You're still merely scouting the outskirts, far short of the vital path of emancipation. And Soen Shaku took that to heart, even though he had already attained transmission, already completed his Zen training, still there was more. There was more, and he knew that. So on to Prajna Paramita. And there are so many texts that one could choose to illustrate Prajna Paramita, so many Zen texts. But I chose an excerpt from the Platform Sutra of Huineng because it's really important to stress the connection between meditation and wisdom, jhana and prajna. And Huineng says these aren't two separate things. They really are the same. One is the body and one is the function. And before I get into his text, I'll give you a little background on Huineng. Again, a lot of you already know as much about Huineng, or in Japanese, Eino Daikon Zenji, as I do. But he was the sixth ancestor, or at least that's what we've been told and what we think. There's a lot of controversy amongst scholars. Scholars are very good at raising controversies about the historicity of various figures, and Huineng is no exception to that. Some people wonder if, in fact, he was the author of the Platform Sutra, saying that perhaps one of his disciples wrote it and just put his name on it because nobody knew the disciple, but everybody knew Eino. Or maybe it just made a good story. We don't really know. What we do know is that there are many legends about Eino. It's said that he was born in 638 and died in 713. So about 500 years before Dogen. Born a little more than 500 years before Dogen was born, died a little more than 500 years before Dogen died. He was very poor as a child and a young man. His father, similar to Dogen, was a court official, but unlike Dogen's father, who remained influential throughout his life, Huineng's father lost favor in the court, which was not a good thing to happen in the Chinese court. He was exiled and sent far away, disgraced, and found it very hard to make a living. And to make matters worse, soon after going into exile, he died. And so Eino Huineng was raised by his mother, who could barely make ends meet. To make ends meet, they gathered firewood and sold it in the marketplace. Eino was supposedly illiterate, had never learned to read because he was so poor, and poor people didn't learn to read. Not at that time. One day, he was selling wood in the marketplace when a monk wandered by reciting the Diamond Sutra. Eino listened and had his Dharma eye opened by hearing the Diamond Sutra. And so when he sold some wood to the monk, he said, "This is incredible what you're saying. It's opening up new worlds for me. It's opening up a new way of seeing for me. Where can I go to hear this and to be trained in this?" And the monk told him about a monastery that he could go to receive training. And so he said goodbye to his mother very sadly, feeling very torn up about it, that he was abandoning his mother, but feeling that he had no choice but to pursue the Dharma. And went to the place of Daishin. He was illiterate, a southerner, which is to say, the northerners in in China at that time thought of the southerners as basically barbarians. Imagine the most backward, illiterate white trash from Alabama coming up to New York City, and it's the 1950s, and we're like, you got to be kidding me. What do you know about Dharma? You're illiterate. You don't have any shoes. You're just trash. So that was pretty much everybody's attitude. But he met the master very early and impressed the master with his understanding immediately. The master asked, "Well, what are you doing here?" And he said, "I've come here to become a Buddha." The master said, "You're a barbarian. What do you know about Buddha?" Aino said, "Well, I may be a southerner, and I may look different from you and sound different from you, but I know that I have the Buddha nature." So the master said, "Okay, I can't ordain you. Nobody's going to put up with that. I can't even recognize you. Nobody's going to put up with that. You go into the kitchen and pound rice. You just do that. And you can listen to talks sometimes, and you'll get the hang of it." So that's what Aino did. He was working in the kitchen, and it came time for the master to retire, and so he set a task for his monks to write a verse expressing their understanding of Zen. And most of the monks, pretty much all of the monks, didn't bother, because they knew that the head monk was going to be chosen as the master. That's what they thought. They thought, why bother? He's got it. We're good. And the head monk realized that his understanding was fine as far as it went, but he was not tremendously sure of himself. But he complied. He wrote his verse. Somebody read that verse to Aino, and Aino heard it and said, he's got some understanding, but write this down. And he dictated a verse to somebody who could write, because he was illiterate and he couldn't write. And I'm not going to read the different verses, because neither of them impressed me very much as poetry. But at any rate, he wrote his verse and tacked it up on the wall next to the head monk's verse. The master recognized that the only one in the monastery who had sufficient understanding to have written this verse was the illiterate barbarian. So he went secretly to him and said, listen, if I recognize you as my successor, there's going to be a riot. Because everybody thinks you're a barbarian. Everybody thinks you are hopeless. And if I give you the robe and bowl, there is just going to be turmoil, riot, it's going to be horrible. But I recognize you as my successor, so take the robe and bowl, which were the sort of like the staff of office, the seal of his recognition. And I will publicly recognize the head monk to give you cover so you can slip away and go off. And eventually you can start teaching the Dharma. So that's what happened. And there's a whole story regarding that. I might as well read it to you. This is case 23 of the Muman Khan. Think neither good nor evil. The sixth ancestor was pursued by the monk Myo as far as Taiyu Mountain. The ancestor, seeing Myo coming, laid the robe and bowl on a rock and said, "This robe represents the faith. It should not be fought over. If you want to take it away, take it now." He was being pursued because when the monks got wind of his recognition by the master, they were out for blood. Basically, they wanted they wouldn't recognize the transmission, and they wanted that robe, that seal of office, the robe and bowl, back, and maybe even to beat up Huineng. So he says, this robe represents the faith. It should not be fought over. If you want to take it away, take it now. Myo tried to move it, but it was as heavy as a mountain and would not budge. Faltering and trembling, he cried out, "I came for the Dharma, not for the robe. I beg you, please give me your instruction." The ancestor said, "Think neither good nor evil. At this very moment, what is the original self of the monk Myo?" At these words, Myo was directly illuminated. His whole body was covered with sweat. He wept and bowed, saying, "Besides the secret words and the secret meaning you have just now revealed to me, is there anything else deeper still?" The ancestor said, "What I have told you is no secret at all. When you look into your own true self, whatever is deeper is found right there." Myo said, "I was with the monks under Obai for many years, but could not realize my true self. But now, receiving your instruction, I know it is like a man drinking water and knowing whether it is cold or warm. My lay brother, you are now my teacher." The ancestor said, "If you say so, but let us both call Obai our teacher. Be mindful to treasure and hold fast to what you have attained." So this story, which, as I said, nobody really knows the true story of Aino. So while this makes a great story, it may be more symbolic than than historical. But symbolically, it's the story of wisdom and meditation. When Eno says, good friends, this Dharma teaching of mine is based on meditation and wisdom. But don't make the mistake of thinking that meditation and wisdom are separate. Meditation and wisdom are of one essence, not two. That's perfectly illustrated by his instruction to Myo when Myo comes to take the robe and the bowl. What is meditation? Remember Dogen's advice on how to do Zazen. Cast aside all involvements and cease all affairs. Do not think good or bad. Do not administer pros and cons. Cease all the movements of the conscious mind, the gauging of thought and views. Have no designs on becoming a Buddha. Zazen has nothing whatever to do with sitting or lying down. They weren't sitting or lying down. Eno just said, think neither good nor evil. Look into your own mind. Look into your own heart. Right now, at this very moment, what is the original self of the monk Myo? Who are you? Look into your mind. Look into your heart. Who are you? And if you think that you can answer in words, look again. Look deeper. Don't try to make up a story. Don't try to impress me. Who are you? And Myo, who, despite having participated in this charade of chasing after Eno to grab the robe and bowl, recognized right away the function of wisdom in Eno's words. And immediately had an experience of enlightenment. So this is Prajna. Prajna is wisdom. Prajna is looking into your heart, looking into your mind, and not formulating concepts or ideas or judgments, but beholding the activity of the mind. Wisdom is, in its most basic form, meditation. Meditation in its most basic form is wisdom. But the expression of wisdom is the expression of activity that is fully engaged, fully dynamic. Wisdom is being able to hold two concepts at the same time, and to go beyond the concept to the reality. One concept is that there is right and wrong, and a proper way of doing things and an improper way of doing things, and understanding right and wrong morally and practically, while at the same time knowing with equal certainty that there is no such thing as a mistake. There is a right way of doing things and a wrong way of doing things. And we try to do things the right way. We try not to do things the wrong way. We try not to do things that are hurtful or harmful or unskillful. But at the same time, wisdom tells us that what happens, happens. And it's not a mistake that it happens. It can't help but happen. And to flagellate yourself or someone else because they didn't do what was expected and what is considered right is a failure of wisdom. To correct them, yes. It's wise to correct. To correct with anything other than the heart of compassion is not wisdom. And that brings me to the other point that I wanted to make about wisdom, which is wisdom by itself is pretty worthless. It's like having one leg. You know, you can hop around pretty well on one leg, but you need another leg in order to actually move in any kind of graceful way. And the other leg is compassion. You have compassion and wisdom, then you're balanced. Bodhicitta is a term for the combination of wisdom, prajna, compassion, karuna, and emptiness, shunyata. And what we really mean when we talk about wisdom in Zen is that combination of all three. Wisdom, compassion, and the dynamic functioning of shunyata. The realization of the true nature of reality is wisdom, but it's also the realization of emptiness. And I probably should explain what shunyata or emptiness is for anyone who is not quite comfortable with the expression. We talk about emptiness, but what we really mean is empty of an abiding self. So we can each point to our bodies and say, this is myself. But that's a convenient fiction. It's a necessary fiction, because otherwise, how could you get a driver's license? How could you pay your rent or cash your Social Security check. So you need this convenient fiction. But this thing that we think of as our self is impermanent, which means it's changing all the time. And it's interdependent on all of the conditions that create it at the moment. Conditions like the society that you live in, it's like we talk about the Nazis and the Germans who lived in the years of the Nazis and how they were all Nazis. And yeah, they might have belonged to the Nazi party, but they weren't Nazis. They were an expression of the conditions of that society at the time. And they did things that later they regretted, largely, and wondered, how could I have done that? That's not me. I'm not that person. How could I have done those things? How? How could we do such things? Of course, the same is going on in a different form in our own country right now. People are saying and doing things that 10 years ago would have been unthinkable. Just unthinkable. How could they possibly be doing that? It's because that self is a fiction. The self that says after the fact, how could I have done those things? That's not me. That's a fiction. The fact of the matter is that we are an expression of conditions. There's I believe it was Hannah Arendt, although I could be mistaken, who said when discussing the atrocities that occurred in Nazi Germany, that 10% of people will be kind no matter what. 10% of people will be cruel no matter what. And the rest go with the wind. When conditions favor kindness, they'll be kind. And when conditions favor cruelty, they'll be cruel. And that is true. Because we have certain habits ingrained in us which are strong. But mostly we are reacting to conditions. We're expressing conditions. So emptiness means that we are interdependent. We're interconnected. And we have no lasting self. Bodhicitta is the interplay between compassion, wisdom, and emptiness. To illustrate that, there are a lot of Zen stories which illustrate that conjunction of wisdom, emptiness, and compassion. This is case 28 of the Mumonkan. Ryutan blows out the candle. Tokusan asked Ryutan about Zen far into the night. At last, Ryutan said, the night is late. Why don't you retire? Tokusan made his bows and lifted the blinds to withdraw, but he was met by darkness. Turning back to Ryutan, he said, "It's dark outside." Ryutan lit a paper candle and handed it to him. Tokusan was about to take it when Ryutan blew it out. At this, all of a sudden, Tokusan went through a deep experience and made vows. Ryutan said, "What sort of realization do you have?" "From now on," Tokusan said, "I will not doubt the words of an old Osho, who is renowned everywhere under the sun." The next day, Ryutan ascended the rostrum and said, "I see a fellow among you. His fangs are like the sword tree. His mouth is like a blood bowl. Strike him with a stick and he won't turn his head to look at you. Some day or other, he will climb the highest of the peaks and establish our way there." Tokusan brought his notes on the Diamond Sutra to the front of the hall, pointed to them with a torch, and said, "Even though you have exhausted the abstruse doctrines, it is like placing a hair in a vast space. Even though you have learned all the secrets of the world, it is like a drop of water dripped on the great ocean." And he burned all his notes. Then, making bows, he took leave of his teacher. So it's a kind of an odd story. First, it helps to know that Tokusan was a scholar. He was a foremost authority on the Diamond Sutra, the same Diamond Sutra that Aino happened to overhear somebody reciting in the marketplace. And immediately, like that, he got it. Aino, the illiterate, the barbarian. Tokusan was learned, had written voluminously on the Diamond Sutra. But he heard about this sect called Zen, which claimed not to rely on words and phrases, not to rely on the sutra, any sutras. And he was outraged. So he traveled to meet with a Zen master to condemn them, like St. Paul when he was on the road to Damascus going to visit the Christians so he could stone them and condemn them and knock the stuffing out of them. And then something happened to him on the way, and instead of going to condemn them, he became their greatest apostle. So this is a similar story. Ryutan is going to condemn. He's going to try to stamp out this horrid creed. And then he meets an old woman by the side of the road who says something to him, and I won't go into that story, but says something to him that makes him say, that old woman knows something that I don't know. And all of a sudden, he's not so sure about himself anymore. And he says, well, where can I go to to get some instruction. And she sends him on to the temple to meet Ryutan, the Zen master. So he's already had a change of heart. He's already realized that maybe his understanding of the Diamond Sutra is all superficial, all on the surface. Maybe his understanding is intellectual, not deep, not from the heart. If you really understand the Diamond Sutra, it transforms the way you see yourself and the world. The Prajna Paramita Sutra is a condensed form of the Diamond Sutra. The Prajna Paramita Sutra is what Eno is talking about in his description of what Prajna is all about. So Tokusan goes to Ryutan, who greets him warmly and takes him into his hut. Talks to him all night long about the Diamond Sutra that Tokusan is supposedly an expert about. And Tokusan is balanced on the edge of some kind of wisdom. He had been reading this text all his life, had written commentaries, was a famous scholar, but he didn't get it. Ryutan explained it to him, and something was opening up in him. His heart, his mind, it was all balanced on the edge. Ryutan says, "It's getting late. Why don't you go to bed?" Tokusan looks outside, says, "It's dark out there." Ryutan gives him a candle. But before he can take the candle, Ryutan blows it out. And somehow, that dynamic action takes this person who's teetering on the edge of a realization, and it's like he's just been pushed over a cliff. That's bodhicitta in action. That's the combination of wisdom, clear seeing exactly what's needed at the moment, that goes beyond concepts. He didn't think out, oh yeah, well, if I just send him out in the dark, he'll get it. You know, if he had thought that, nothing would have happened. But he had the intuitive wisdom and the compassion to spend all of that time with him talking, and to really see what he needed, to really see who Tokusan was and what would be the most compassionate thing he could do for him. And then you've got shunyata, you've got the dynamic functioning, the recognition of conditions, the recognition of change and possibility and interdependence and interconnection and intuitive action, just like that. At its best, that is what Zen wisdom is, and Zen spirit. And it's getting late, so I'm not going to go on for too long, but I did want to read one more story. This is the story of Yakujo and Baso. Baso was the dividing line between Soto and Rinzai Zen. Baso was a student of Eno, the sixth ancestor, who I've already read about. The sixth ancestor had another successor who started the path of the Soto line. Baso started the path of the Rinzai line. Baso had over 130 successors, so quite the teacher. Yakujo was the teacher of Obaku, who was the teacher of Rinzai. So Yakujo was the Dharma grandfather of Rinzai. When Baso Badaishi was out walking with Yakujo, he saw a wild duck fly past. Baso said, "What is it?" Yakujo said, "It's a wild duck." Daishi said, "Where is it?" Yakujo said, "It's flown away." Baso at last gave Yakujo's nose a sharp pinch. Yakujo cried out with pain. Daishi said, "There! How can it fly away?" This is another example of Zen wisdom. This is the sort of what's called crazy wisdom. It's wisdom that makes no conceptual sense and is a perfect illustration of how wisdom and intellect are not the same thing. Yakujo's answers were perfectly reasonable answers. The wild duck. Where is it? Flew away. But Baso knew Yakujo. Baso knew the spiritual, mental, emotional, psychological condition of his student. Baso could clearly see who and what Yakujo was, better than Yakujo could see himself. And so he asked these sort of mundane questions and got mundane answers. But Baso was asking on a level that is beyond the mundane. He didn't care about whether it was a wild duck or a wild turkey or a pigeon. He didn't care if it had flown away or swum away or walked away. He wanted Yakujo to see clearly the interdependence, the interconnectedness, the absolute naked reality without the differentiation of it's a duck, it's flying. He wanted Yakujo to see this thing happening without past, present, or future. Just like Eno talks about when he talks about Prajna Paramita. It's the noblest, the highest, the ultimate. It isn't present, it isn't past, and it isn't future. That also comes from the Diamond Sutra, which says, past mind cannot be retained, present mind cannot be held, future mind cannot be grasped. It isn't past, it isn't present, it isn't future. And yet the Buddhas of the present, the past, and the future all come from it and use this great wisdom to reach the other shore and to break through the afflictions and passions of the five skandhas. That's what Baso is doing when he tweaks Yakujo's nose. He is collapsing Yakujo's world, obliterating his convenient categorizations. And it only makes sense in the context of a teacher who is acting out of pure bodhicitta, compassionate concern for his student, wisdom to know exactly who and what Yakujo is, and the dynamic functioning of shunyata, the dynamic functioning of action that is not conceptual, that is not based on plans and dissecting, if I do this, this will happen. It's being totally in the moment, totally with it. And it's rare. But that's what we're training for. That is what this training is about, is the development of this bodhicitta, this wisdom, which goes beyond words, sutras, and talks like mine.